Linda is going to continue the discussion of the unfortunate physical results, laws of physics between cetaceans and boats.
Okay, not exactly, actually. I'm going to stick away from all the, this is more about what's the chance that these events could happen. Okay, sorry, I wasn't paying attention to the, okay, so to make my slides go forward, I'm going to push back when that's, okay. Okay, so yes, the title here is Large Baleen Whale Ship Strike Risk on the west coast of Vancouver Island. So instead of thinking about, okay, let's make this go. Okay, so ship traffic poses collision risk to whales. It really does. You've already seen that it's difficult to actually enumerate the number of animals that are being struck. So another approach might be to look at the risk or the probability that these events might occur. And another title I might have given to this talk would have been something like Whale Habitat Bisected by Marine Highways, or Roadkill on the Open Seas. So the issue for us at DFO is a lot to do with species that are listed as threatened or endangered. So these species, blue whales, fin whales, humpbacks, and the right whale that was on the very first picture that I showed, occur off places like the west coast of Vancouver Island, which happens to be bisected by one of these marine highways. And so we're concerned about what's the chance of these animals being struck by ships. One of the reasons that big ships like this are a cause of concern are for a number of reasons. One is the routes overlap whale habitat. The other is the speed of ships. The other is the size of ships. And the final one has to do with the draft of the ships, the fact that these ships actually go under the water, and that there's an even greater distance under the water that the effect of being struck by a whale can occur as a result of hydrodynamic forces around the moving ship. Okay, so the shipping routes overlap whale habitat. This is a slide. The bottom here, I'm showing you some of this traffic data for the west coast of Vancouver Island. It says AIS, that means Automated Information System. It's the reporting of ship traffic information, and this is the source of the data that we used. And what you're seeing here are some circles, and this is basically the study area that we were interested in. And you can see some very bright colors, and that shows you the routes and the intensity of shipping that's coming in and out of Juan de Fuca Strait. The ships are going to places like Port Metro, Vancouver, Tacoma, Seattle. So these are all really big ports, and there's a lot of traffic. And it happens to overlap with whale habitat. Now, speed is an issue. It turns out that the lethality of a ship strike increases with speed, and it's not a linear relationship, it's actually exponential. So when you get to speeds over 10 knots, the lethality quite a lot. So what we did first was, our question, of course, was, well, where are the whales? We know there's a highway. We know that historically there were whales out there on the west coast, but we didn't have a lot of data. So our first thing to do was to get some information on the distribution of these large whales on the west coast, and we did that with aerial surveys. And we worked with Transport Canada, who have a surveillance plane that they do pollution surveillance flights out there. We did 34 surveys. And that was our huge study area. We could never do that in a matter of 34 single-day surveys by ship. So this was truly accomplished because we were in the air. And this is our data. These are the results of all those surveys. And I'm only showing you 3 species here, and I'm only going to end up talking about 2 of them. So these are the baleen whales. We had 5 sightings of blue whales, so it turned out not to be enough for the modeling approach we used, but they're there. And we have fin whales, which are all the red dots, and humpback whales. And you can see instantly that there's a bit of habitat separation between those two. Humpbacks on the shelf, fin whales off the shelf. So, and here's the traffic data. So and that's over our study area. So the pattern here, I just want you to note these colors. The pattern on the first tells you about the distribution of the traffic, reported as relative probability of encountering a vessel in any part of the study area. And where it's red, that's the highest density. And then as it diffuses out, as the ships spread, as they head offshore, it becomes a paler green, yellow. And then the blue is where there's quite low densities of shipping. The bottom figure shows the speed. So this is the part of the data set we were most interested in. We were interested in that part of that traffic population that's large ships traveling offshore from ports that are traveling at speeds of over 12 knots. And it turns out most of that traffic is traveling at speeds over 12 knots. Okay, so what we were interested in doing, what I want you just to notice is the graph on the left-hand side at the top with the colored dots. So that's the same figure I showed you before. So the green yellow are all those humpback whale sightings. So what we needed to do first was we need to create sort of think of it as a surface, a probability surface of where these whales are. So these whales are like our samples, and we want to actually have a predictive surface of where those humpback whales are in our study area. So we did something called a GAM, which is a generalized additive model, and we used some predictors of latitude and depth, and we came out with this relative probability of encountering a humpback whale. And what you can see from this, the take-home message, the humpback whale highest probability of encountering a humpback whale is on the shelf, right about the 200 meter depth contour, and then it becomes a little more diffuse on the shelf, and that they're basically not off the shelf. And then we did the same thing with our fin whale data, and in this case, the fin whales are the pink, and you can see the sightings are fairly diffuse over what we call this sort of abyssal plain once you get off the shelf. That's where most of them were. And when we model that to get a smooth surface, we show that the relative probability of encountering a fin whale gets higher as you move away from that shelf and off the slope. The slope area would be where it's yellow. Relative probability is yellow, and then it gets higher as you head further off. So that was sort of our distribution models of fin whales. So okay, that's our data set for the fin whales and the humpback whales. And now we're interested in saying, well, let's put those two together. Let's put humpbacks and ships together. So again, on the left-hand side where it says A, that's again that model just showing you where those humpback whales are. Immediately to the right of that where it says C, it shouldn't say C, but it does, is where the probability of a ship and a humpback whale being in the same space. And the same space is actually quite a large cell. It's a 5 by 5 grid cell. So what that shows you is that where a ship and a humpback whale are most likely to encounter each other is in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and as you're coming out of that Strait of Juan de Fuca and just near the shelf break. And then the bottom one says, so where it says E, this is where, okay, given those areas where you have a high relative probability of a ship and a whale, let's take into consideration the speed of ships. So remember, speeds of ships traveling over 10 to 12 knots have an exponentially higher risk of causing a lethal strike. And so when you put that onto that as well in our modeling exercise here, you see again that the highest risk of a lethal strike is in the Strait of Juan de Fuca at the entrance as it begins to fan out and right at the shelf break. So then we did the same thing with fin whales. Oh, I went the wrong way. Whoops. So here's our fin whales again. So on the left is actually just showing you the relative probability of encountering a fin whale all by itself swimming around out there. And immediately to the right is the probability of you encountering a ship and a whale in the same grid cell, one of these big ships coming out of the ports. And where you can see again is we end up with the Strait of Juan de Fuca is quite a high probability. But the area that's particularly interesting is when you get off the shelf and you see this line heading westward off the shelf. And then again, we add that, we say, okay, within that area, given that ships and whales are encountering each other, we add on that lethality component. And again, we see that the highest likelihood where whales are going to be struck, I'm almost there, don't you dare. So the highest strike of being struck is also in that area. So, and that's it. So that was my, actually I'm going to go back. So I just want to say this is a huge effort. This is just the people who are helped in this aerial survey. There's more people who helped with analysis. And I also want to acknowledge all the funding support. And the most important part was our enthusiastic, dedicated team, unlimited. We couldn't have done this without this huge team of people. Thanks.
I'm not here to intimidate you.
You are.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not. Ask my students, I'm not intimidating in the least. Do we have a quick question for Linda while we're getting set up?
Yes. The question is, do I think that cruise ships, which are the ones we've had a number of incidents where whales are actually showing up on the bow of a cruise ship in Vancouver Harbor, and we hence know, oh, it really was struck. And the question is, do you think those are being picked up in the Strait of Juan de Fuca or somewhere else? And yeah, because they aren't going. So in fact, in those cases, actually, we've focused our study off the west coast of Vancouver Island. But another area that's probably going to emerge as fairly important is the routes those cruise ships are taking, which is actually coming down through Hecate Strait and Queen Charlotte Sound. And so that's the whole point of this was to demonstrate a way of doing this, showing that we can bring this data together in sort of a probability of risk type of an analysis, which is an alternative approach to actually enumerating the number of mortalities.
Next person, sorry.